we're going to go ahead and get started with the next session. No, it's okay. So this is the first general session of the day. It's my pleasure to be the person to introduce this session every year because I think it's one that people really enjoy hearing. We ask friends of ours from other parts of the country, and in this case, other parts of the world, to come and talk about what they're doing in terms of RNA networking. And so I am happy that we have some folks here. The first panel will be regional networks in the United States. The second panel will be international networks, specifically Canada and Mexico, and points beyond I think they'll talk a little bit about. I've been asked to do a little housekeeping first, and that is to remind folks that the presentation is being streamed live. So during the Q&A session, if you could raise your hand if you have a question, someone will bring a microphone around to you. That way people can hear both the question and the answer. We have 3 speakers today. I'll do a brief introduction of them, and then they're going to speak in turn. Marla Meehl is the manager of UCAR, the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, in the Network Engineering and Telecommunications section. She also, as part of this, is responsible for the Front Range Gigapop, UPOP, and Bison. She'll talk about those during her talk. She's worked at UCAR in networking for 25 years. Gonzales is the Chief Information Officer at the University of New Mexico and took that position in 2008, during which time he's worked to establish a direction for the university to strengthen core services and broaden IT collaboration institution-wide and regionally. Prior to being at the University of New Mexico, Gil was the CIO at Cal State University, Monterey Bay, and I think we all know Gil pretty well from his years there, and we're delighted to continue our interaction with him with regard to Western Regional Network and other things that we're working with him on. The third presenter today is a shift from what we usually do in the Regional Networks panel. There's a new CEO at the West Coast. There's a regional network out on the West Coast of the United States. It's got an odd name. CENIC, yes. They hired a new CEO last year, Louis Fox, and he's agreed to speak today a little bit about what's going on in California and sorts of things they're doing on the what they call the California Research and Education Network, CalREN. So without further ado, I turn over the panel to Marla.
Thanks. So I decided to speak from slides, and those of you in California should appreciate you do not have ice to deal with. So I'm from Colorado. Obviously, we've had a very icy winter, and I experienced it firsthand. Acronym soup, we've all are used to a lot of acronyms. As we said, I work for the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. There's a lot of confusion about our organization. We are a 501c3. We're not a government organization, but we are funded 100% by the government. So that's an interesting setup. UCAR actually manages the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which I think most of you are more familiar with that name. You heard it mentioned earlier. We do a broad range of climate and atmospheric research, and that's actually housed in Boulder. In an odd configuration, we're a little bit different than other regional optical networks in that we are managed underneath another corporation that really has no mission to manage regional networks. So I had to do some convincing why UCAR should commit to manage the Front Range Gigapop. I think its justification is that we, as a national research center, need really good networking, and therefore it's in our best interest to manage it. And Colorado is not in position from state networking point of view to set up a state network, so we've actually managed it for a number of years. We started another organization called the UCAR Point of Presence to handle the growth for the smaller organizations that weren't major universities or research organizations. And a few years ago, we built the Bi-State Optical Network, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And so I'm responsible for all of those. The Front Range Gigapop's actually got 12 years of operations under its belt. We have 12 members, and we cover Colorado and Wyoming. We pretty much have all major public and private universities and federal research organizations within the Front Range Gigapop. We have a formal management and technical committee, but not a formal board. So most of the other regionals that are actually standalone not-for-profits have an actual board structure and a CEO and that kind of infrastructure, which we do not have. Really, all financial infrastructure stays with UCAR, and so we adhere to all those government cost accounting rules. So we're, again, a little bit different there. We are partnering with the Western Regional Network, which Gil's going to talk more about, with CENIC and New Mexico, Pacific Northwest Gigapop, Hawaii, and LEARN. And that's been very positive experience for us working with them. And we are a member of the Quilt, so we do participate in the consortium of regional networks. Again, I think we're a little bit different. We're very cost-based. We have minimal overhead. We do not have just a large fee base. You really pay for what you get. So you pay for tiers of I2 service, tiers of NLR service, commodity tiers. And with that, we do fund 3 dedicated engineers. All management, accounting, legal contracts are covered out of the overhead and are as I said, under UCAR and follow their infrastructure and their rules. We have a repetitive there on Quilt. We do support the Colorado SEGP. There's always questions why the state of Colorado doesn't help fund that. Colorado's not a terribly active networking state, and so that's actually shared by all the entities that benefit from the SEGP, and so that cost is distributed out. And we do, as I said, share our commodity, I2 and NLR with WRN, so we actually benefit from cost benefits and economies of scale of sharing all those services. And we do only serve not-for-profits, which I think is fairly common among the regionals, but that is an even bigger issue for us as a federally funded organization, that we can't be seen as competing with the commercial sector, and so we are very careful not to have any for-profits behind us. So these are our membership. I won't go through that in detail. This year have spent some time upgrading all our routing hardware to Junipers. We have very small infrastructure compared to California. We really have 3 co-location sites all in Denver, and so when we upgrade 3 routers as opposed to hundreds of routers. We have the 3 co-location facilities are connected by fiber we control and are able to upgrade that as needed. We do peer with Google. That was actually active this year directly in Denver. We have Comcast peering, although that's been decreasing in importance due to some shifts at Comcast, and so less traffic actually goes out of that. We benefit a great deal from the Transit Rail CPS peering, and clearly that's the largest amount of our traffic goes out to peering, which I think, again, is pretty true with most of the regionals, that's where most traffic's going. We have an Akamai cache in Denver that we use pretty heavily, and we just, with the help of CENIC, have put up a Netflix cache, which literally is going active this week, so we're hoping to offload all the movies that are downloading and get faster service. So we have been participating in DINES. Both University of Colorado and Colorado State University are participating in that. University of Colorado Boulder is actually up and ready to go. They just need to actually get some scientific applications running across it. And they're actually looking at the LCH data and participating in that. And Colorado State's actually waiting some hardware, and so they haven't actually gone active on that. The UPOP, as I said, we started later because we realized our model did not scale. Every Front Range Gigapop member actually gets a full vote on our committees, and so it was not scaling to the size of all of the entities that were coming in behind us. So we actually have 21 members of the UPOP, and those are really the K through 12s, our smaller colleges, community colleges, small not-for-profits. And they actually have no direct voice in governance. They actually pay a fairly large part of the cost we have, but They don't actually get to vote, which so far they've been willing to accept, but that's just purely a cost-sharing mechanism. And again, this gives you an idea, kind of the entities that are behind us, and the scope of that. And as I said, some of these entities, you'll see the U.S. Antarctic Program used quite a bit of data, but they were never really very active in our management, so we actually shifted them over to the UPOP. We were talking about large networks. The National Ecological Observatory Network, NEON, was awarded by NSF a few years ago. It's actually its headquarters are in Boulder. It's similar to the Ocean Observatory that Larry talked about earlier, but they're doing biological research, and they're actually putting up hundreds of sites across the U.S., but other locations, because as with ocean data, there's a feeling there's a missing component of biological data that feeds into like climate models and other modeling, ecological modeling, and so they're hoping to get better data. And of course, with the distributive nature of that, they'll have to get networking back, and at some point we'll have a large data cache that they'll make available to other researchers. So we're working with them on trying to get them connected to the FRGP and UPOP, and I think, as most of you have ever built fiber networks, it's always the last mile that is difficult, and so we actually have last inches that we need to figure out how to get them connected, but we're working with them. NREL is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It's based in Golden, Colorado, and they've just recently gotten some proposals funded with University of Colorado, and so they have greater incentive than they have before to connect to the Front Range Gigapop for broader connectivity. They've always been, they're a DOE lab, so they've always been connected to ESNet, but we're working with them. Again, the last mile is difficult. They're very close to the School of Mines, but difficult last inch to get built. So, the Bi-State Optical Network, Bison, covers Northern Colorado, University of Wyoming, and the NWSC, which is the NCAR Wyoming Supercomputing Center. We recently had to do a fiber expansion to connect the supercomputing center. NCAR did a front-range search, decided on a number of items that Cheyenne was the best location to put our center. And so we actually just were able to do that expansion and get the center up last fall. School of Mines, as I said, is a big participant in the Front Range Gigapop, and they're going to put a supercomputer actually in Boulder with the space that's been freed up by our supercomputer moving out. And so we're going to expand Bison out to pick them up as well in Golden. Again, we're probably a little bit different than other organizations. Our fiber segments that build Bison are actually owned by all of the entities in different groups. So we own some, Colorado State owns some, Wyoming owns some. So no single entity actually owns the whole fiber infrastructure, which can make for interesting things. And our IRUs actually all expire at different times, which is a challenge. We do have an end-of-service replacement for our optical hardware. We use ADVA hardware, and that's coming up in 2017, so we're in the process of investigating whether we'll continue with ADVA or whether we'll do a full forklift, and then the challenge of funding that, which is always a big issue. And we do have a major fiber move. We actually own some fiber between Fort Collins and Laramie, which is a bit unusual, and we don't have O&M on that, operations and maintenance on that. So we actually have to do the maintenance on that fiber, and so we've already had a major move. This is another major move of that same segment, and we're expecting another major move. So we're actually looking at options to replace that. However, Laramie, Wyoming is not the biggest hub for fiber optics in the world, so that's turning out to be a bit of a challenge. So we'll see where that all ends up. This is kind of a quick look for those of you that aren't familiar with the geography in Colorado and Wyoming, but that's the way the Bison network is structured. It is a full ring, and as you can see, on the green segment is where we built in redundant paths into our Wyoming supercomputing center to make sure it was fully protected on the ring, which worked out well. This is our new supercomputing center. When we're at other supercomputing centers, we have to show off and compete. It is a beautiful center. It's big. This is Yellowstone, which is an IBM platform supercomputer. It did go active in November. It's 1.5 petaflops, which is 1.5 quadrillion operations per second. A lot of power goes into this. We are often criticized for being the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and obviously fairly convinced that global warming is actually happening. And so it's often asked, well, is this a green center? It is a LEED certified location, but that doesn't mean we're not burning lots of fossil fuels to power those supercomputers. As some people will say, it's clean coal, but that's an oxymoron. So anyways, there's a lot of power pouring into it. We have had some interesting issues with InfiniBand cabling and firmware on this IBM. It is now stable and does seem to be performing well. A learning experience from our side is we don't normally do the supercomputer networking, the InfiniBand networking, and next time we may suggest that we do that. So if you're more interested in anything on the NWC, there's some links there. We also work very closely with NOAA Boulder. They're just literally down the hill from us, and they built N-Wave in the last couple years, and the Front Range Gigapop is one of their major hubs for that, as are a number of regional networks across the country. They have a 10 gig MPLS backbone. They do have a 100 gig upgrade path. They use both Internet 2 and NLR for some of that backbone, and they have had a challenge, mostly contracting, I think, with all the regionals, but they are active and running. Colorado does have a FCC-funded CTN, Colorado Telehealth, and they've been connected to us since they came into play. We do not manage their network. CenturyLink does, and they're actually open on an RFP right now to replace that. It's likely CenturyLink could win it again, but they'll still continue to participate with the Front Range Gigapop. A number of you may have heard of BTOP awards. They were awarded to build out middle mile and last mile in various states. California had one. Interestingly, we did, again, because of our situation as UCAR, we're not in a position actually to submit for that directly. An organization called EagleNet was formed. It's an IGA, and they were awarded $100 million in Colorado. If you've been watching the news at all, the NTIA is under some attack for the stimulus funds and how they've been funded, and EagleNet in particular has taken some hits. They're actually on hold right now, not because of any funding questions, but because of some environmental issues where there were huge numbers of miles of fiber and microwave. They shifted some microwave to fiber and hadn't appropriately done the environmentals for that, and there's a couple plant grasses that are in endangered areas. So they hope to come off of that freeze at the end of March. They're trying to connect all 178 school districts in Colorado. They have to be completed by August 13th. That's when the stimulus funds expire. And clearly, from our perspective, EagleNet is one of our members. They bring a lot of the K through 12s to us. When we hear community anchor institution growth, that's where that growth will come for the Front Range Gigapop is as a secondary through the EagleNet connection. So our futures and challenges, we have 5-year agreements with all of our members. Those are coming up in 2014, and that's a long and agonizing process. And so we'll be starting to work on that actually this year. It takes a lot of my time and a lot of my agreements people time. You know, as I discussed, Bison growth and upgrade and funding are a big challenge for us right now. And the way we're funded, literally, we have to come up with that money as a group and a consortium. And so funding's always a challenge. We are being asked about supporting and funding Net Plus services, and we're investigating that right now. The Front Range Gigapop does not provide services. We don't do any co-location services, DNS services, numbering services, that kind of stuff. And so that would be a switch for us to actually provide services. And so we're looking at that, considering it, trying to figure out how we would actually fund that. As I said, Colorado is not a real leader as a state in networking, and we are trying to work with them on statewide coordination. I think they're kind of coming to and realizing that they need to be participating in this a little bit more. And so my counterpart, Jeff Custard, is working with a group to try and get better communication and coordination across the state. We do have a number of our fiber IRUs coming up for renewal, and that is a challenge. We have some very nice pricing, and I'm expecting the next 20 years probably might not be as nice a pricing, so we'll see how that goes. And, you know, there's pressure to support 40 and 100 gig. You're seeing it here. You know, again, we have hardware capable of that, but it's expensive to support and fund. And so, again, that's as pressure comes down to put that into place. We'll have to come up with funding mechanisms to do that. So So that's all I have. I think we'll probably hold questions towards the end.
Good afternoon. First of all, let me ask the question, show of hands just for a second. How many have you been to New Mexico? Anybody? And so what do you think? Chuckles, okay. So from Monterey to New Mexico, ask the question later on, okay? So let me start out by saying that this panel is really assembled part of understanding regionalism and how, in fact, institutions of higher education have influence and impact across its area of influence. In New Mexico, University of New Mexico is, we call ourselves the flagship institution for New Mexico. It's got 24,000 students. It's got about a $2.2 billion budget. It's got a hospital, a law school, and so on. It's a big deal to legislators, and they expect a whole lot from the university. So let me start by saying that this next 8 or 9 minutes is about regionalism, networks, and working together from a CIO's perspective. Slightly different than a regional optical network, but in some days these roles overlap when you're in a small place. So let me talk about collaboration just for a moment, because collaborators is oftentimes a misused term, and so what we really talk about in collaborators in New Mexico is people who are willing to bring resources and assume some risk. So everything that follows from here is about how New Mexico really has been maturing as a place that is very, very much impacted by broadband, very much impacted by regional connectivity in ways which we've never had the access to before. So UNM is one of the very high research institutions. We're one of the largest Hispanic serving institutions in the country. We care a whole lot about how we try to attract students to the state, to our university, and to stay in New Mexico. And we think having regional connectivity is one way to do that. So there's a whole other presentation on economic development that goes on behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, we're really trying to turn New Mexico into a place that is well connected, is well respected in its collaborations, and I think that can be said by working with organizations like CENIC and others. And probably the most important part is we touch places where there's no water and no power. And I have this conversation with Dave Reese oftentimes about places like in some parts of California where it's very rural, but in New Mexico there are places still with no power, no water. So these are the challenges as we go forward. So let me start. Collaboration is really we're trying to advantage geography. Albuquerque is in the middle of the state. It's all along an interstate highway that one runs east-west, one runs north-south. We had to take advantage of that in some way. We also had to deal with cost containment. Like many states, we've been cutting our budgets for the last several years, the last 5 years to be exact, just like California. And so we had to do things where we forced collaboration and aggregation in ways which, in some people's minds, were unnatural. And then finally, we had to drive innovation in the same breath because we had to figure out ways in which our faculty and our staffs could actually do the things that were necessary so they could compete in many ways with the great universities of California, the great universities of Colorado, and others. So it's very important in this discussion is to understand that that's why we're doing this. So back to UNM very briefly. When I arrived in 2008, I had a single connection to the internet. It's at 655 megabits, and we were dying. We had an I2 connection we made very little use of, and our NLR connection, which we were one of the initial Class A members, was just as much unused. So we started our conversation in 2008 by trying to advantage the university to gain the connectivity that we could actually put on the table for our faculty. So with that, we built up, well actually not built up, I had a deficit unit and organization called the Albuquerque Gigapop. It was about $1 million in the hole, operating in a deficit. And this was actually a Carrier Hotel location in downtown Albuquerque that was severely underfunded, not well managed, and more importantly, didn't have the benefit, any benefit to the university or to the community. In the same breath, we have other branches. We have a branch in Los Alamos, a branch in Gallup. I'll talk more about that. A branch in Valencia, which is just south of Albuquerque, and a branch in Taos, also a very nice place. So in this same breath, we needed to go in and start looking at our aggregation strategies, what products we could put on the table, because we had to recover cost. We had to remove the $1 million deficit and move forward in a way that made sense to New Mexico. And let me stop with that for a moment. We need to find collaborators. There was no way New Mexico in and of itself could execute any kind of strategies that could bring connectivity to our region. And with that, we engaged in a discussion that turned into something called the Western Regional Network. And these are the partners we work with to bring connectivity in and through New Mexico, sometimes just on the way. But more importantly, this collaboration has helped us bring capacity into the state and bring diversity of routes, bring diversity of products to help us understand how our faculty can use the networks more thoughtfully. But more importantly, we use it to advantage the state as a whole, and we'll get to that too. So the collaborators, as Marla mentioned, CENIC, Gigapop, Pacific Northwest Gigapop, University of Hawaii, UNM as the university, and of course Texas Learn, who's recently agreed to participate with us. So in the WRN group, we share a 10 gig wave across Albuquerque, Denver, Seattle, Ogden in the middle, back to Los Angeles, Phoenix, and El Paso and Albuquerque. And on that 10 gig ring, we've been able to deliver capacity to the state in ways which we couldn't do so in the past. That ring also allows us to have failover strategies. So when we saw a router upgrade going on in Salt Lake City, we actually captured most of the Colorado traffic going south, although there was some consternation. We picked up all the Colorado traffic and failed over when we needed to. So we were able to actually use the network in ways we needed to. And probably the most important part is this was a private network. So we're looking at continuing to evolve that network to add more capacity going east into Texas, going further west beyond Hawaii. We think having a private network is a useful strategy as we go forward, in addition to, not in place of, the very fine networks that Internet 2 builds, the very fine networks that NLR makes available to us. We use capacity differently. We use it in ways in which makes sense to a collaboration, not as a subscriber, as a collaborator. So because of NLR, there was an NSF grant that was released to NLR, and they didn't accept it for various reasons. And so they asked if UNM would be interested in taking the $2.93 million NSF grant and trying to make some use of it. The grant initially was intended to build capacity along the NLR ring that crossed every point NLR made available, didn't have the money to do that. We also, frankly, did not have the collaborators to do that as well. So we turned to WRN, and we actually focused those $2.9 million or so along 4 projects. One project was focused around the idea that we would take unlit fiber and make use of it. The other one is we looked at a strong collaborator. In this case, it was Internet 2 to allow us to put blades and chassis and transponders and make them available on the I2 network. So the 4 projects go as follows. The first one was a 10 gig wave between Albuquerque via a place called Santa Rosa down to El Paso, which gave UNM for the first time ever a physically diverse route along our most important southern route. We did that for 2 reasons. One is because we want to put funding into the hands of the BTOP awardees. Many of our small telco companies took loans out to build their capacity. We use this as an opportunity to put funds back into their coffers and to help them continue to build capacity along places in Mexico that, frankly, they wouldn't build anyways. The second project was a 40 gig increase from San Antonio to El Paso with Texas Learn. We did that in cooperation and coordination, again, with the great help of Internet 2. So now they have capacity along a route that caused them some problems at times. The third project was a 40 gig capacity build from Denver to Chicago, of which all the WRN members use. Again, another Internet 2 project where they're allowed to add a capacity along an existing route. This helps us gain access to Starlight and other national networks. And then finally, the last project was a 100 gig project that was an unlit fiber use between Pacific Northwest Gigapop and CENIC to Seattle to Los Angeles, which then I assume now CENIC takes advantage of and makes use for its research capacity over time. So those are the 4 NSF RI projects that were unfolded the last couple of years, and they were primarily built upon the relationships established in WRN. So we think that kind of regionalism is incredibly important as well to cross state boundaries, to ignore the political and oftentimes go in places where people don't really want to go. My favorite example is that I was going into the Zuni Pueblo, where I had to be reminded that they had, I of course took my colleagues from Navajo Tech with me, and they reminded me that next time I bring Navajos into the Zuni Pueblo, I had to be reminded that they had ongoing annual ceremonies where the killing of Navajos was the topic. So every so often, we find these kinds of examples where we have to cross these lines, whether it's Texas and New Mexico, whether it's Arizona and New Mexico. We have to do this in order to provide the connectivity in ways in which we couldn't operate before. So what we're doing now with, in the area of regionalism in New Mexico, let me give a couple examples and how the university, and this is a capacity we built over the last 4 years to help, again, gain some advantage. The first one is working with the Navajo Tribal Authority. NTUA has put in as part of the BTOP award, it's actually about a 40 gig ring from Albuquerque to Shiprock and down into a place called Yatahe. Unfortunately, the Yatahe drop ends about 3 miles before it gets to Gallup. So what the university is now doing is working with the city of Gallup to do the final builds, to pull fiber from Yatahe into Gallup and to add it to the city's burgeoning fiber network. And more importantly, it gains connectivity for UNM Gallup, which is one of our campuses in town. So part of what we're doing is trying to extend the capacity of a BTOP award with some very critical residents in the Navajo Nation, and trying to make sense of how we can do the last mile build as a university in cooperation with the city. A second byproduct of that project is working with Navajo Tech, as we're working with the University Education Network to get to a place called Tecnos Pass, which is up on the very close to the Colorado border. So these projects, whether they're fiber projects or microwave projects, help the university not only make available capacity for our instructional programs, but also help our researchers as we continue on doing work in the San Juan Basin area, coming out of our College of Architecture and Planning as well as anthropology. So we think of using the entire state as our laboratory to make available capacity where necessary, and we think that backhaul into these large networks is necessary. We're no different than the cell tower providers now in this case. Another example is up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we're working with the BTOP awardee ReadyNet, which covers north and northern New Mexico, Taos, Kit Carson Electric, and more importantly, Santa Fe Community College, where today the current cost for a 10 meg connection for the community college is about $5,000 a month. So we're working with the community college in the city to drop their costs. We have examples where we've delivered internet connectivity to our colleagues in the state where they were paying up towards $250 a meg, where we now have it down to about 10 to 15. So we believe that's another role the university plays through adding regional connectivity by backhauling traffic, getting access to high-speed connections across the western United States, and doing aggressive peering. Those are the types of services that we think are in long-term best interest of the state and in the best interest of our residents. The last two examples of trying to work through diversity of routes comes with a collaboration between University of New Mexico, Arizona State, University of Arizona, Northern Arizona, and UTEP. We clearly understand the value of a placement like El Paso in our region. We're trying to connect not only the institutions on the Texas side into our collaborations, and more importantly, we're building different types of projects that involve healthcare, for example, or connecting state and regional networks. So the Boulder Regional Group, this is an MOU between the CIOs of these four institutions, is really set up to help us understand what our next steps are to looking for diversity of routes. We too are suspect to the routes that fall along I-10, our southern interstate. We like to work with others, and we continue to do so with groups like CENIC to find diversity of routes so we can provide more resilient networks as we go forward. The other project is going to the east, and we're working with Learn to come up with alternative routes to Lubbock, Texas. So let's work with BTOP awardees through various telco builds, oftentimes assembling the local telco providers in the room for the first time. There are only 13 in New Mexico, but they operate very independently. We work with them to provide alternative routes. In this case, we think we've come up with a couple options for the Texas group that gives us the type of physical diversity they could never have before. And then finally, of course, the application for all of this has to do with placing and making available the new type of work that's being done with software-defined networks, projects that involve federation, projects involving the consolidation of everything from our ERP systems, creating New Mexico cloud capacity, working collectively to gain access to cloud providers across the West, including the Azure services and Amazon. Those are the types of applications at least New Mexico is interested in, all in the framework of a regional perspective rather than a campus perspective. In other words, 4 years ago at University of New Mexico, the CIO worried about the property between Central, Lomas, Girard, and I forget what the other street is. Now we look across the entire state. We try to make sense of how, in fact, university can advantage and become an economic engine in the region by delivering capacity to not only our contracts with the public schools. We worked with companies, startups, including those that provide services to DreamWorks. We worked with organizations in our state and federal. We connect with Los Alamos, Intel, and others. So we provide one option of the many options necessary to be a progressive, active member of the state. So UNM is part of that collaboration. It can only be done with the strong work that's being done regionally. And so it's no longer just looking at the city, it's looking across the state and beyond our own boundaries. So at the end of the day, to our new president who arrived 6 months ago, two directives: be agile and be competitive. And we think that these types of collaborations can make a difference. That's it.
It's really great to have such wonderful partners as Front Range and University of New Mexico. Sherilyn asked me to talk a little bit about what's going on at CENIC because it may not be your dinner table conversation every night like it is at my house. So I thought I'd talk about some of the strategic directions that we're going. The first one is the most obvious. We will continue to provide an improving, robust, cost-effective, state-of-the-art communication network for our participating institutions, which now number roughly 10,000, and in a given day in California, probably 10 million users, so more than a third of the state of California. The main focus of the past few months has been with Internet 2 initially, building out the first 100 gig pathway between Los Angeles and Seattle, but subsequently looking at enabling the entire backbone and connecting a number of the research institutions in California to that 100 gig capacity. This will be done in the coming months, working with our two technical advisory councils for CENIC. And what we thought was going to be a gradual path to 100 gig turns out to be a much accelerated path to 100 gig. So you'll see a lot more of activity in that arena. The services portfolio, as you know, we have a voice over IP project. We're working with UCLA in the lead and the University of California more broadly on a mobile web framework. We have been working with Amazon Web Services and DataPipe to provide members access to some of their services. And last year about this time, we began providing NOC and engineering services to NLR. And we've had some interesting expressions of our inquiries about the potential for CENIC to provide NOC services, particularly to some scientific endeavors, national scientific endeavors. Well, at the same time we work at the very high end of networking, we always have an eye towards broadband access. One of the I only knew California when I came here from its cities, and I've now gotten a little more familiarity with the rural parts of the state, and there's a surprising number of our members who are not well served and do not have adequate broadband access. And so this will continue to be a focus. We have one proposal that we've done in partnership with a company called CENIC that is in front of the California Public Utility Commission to build some fiber on the Central Coast. It's an important project. We have worked with the Northern California Regional Middle Mile Infrastructure Project, leading a couple of community-based conversations about broadband access in the northern part of California. And the community and the process has yielded up a possible company that would be providing broadband access, and that company has a proposal in front of the Public Utility Commission as well. We don't have a governance or a fiduciary role in the company, but certainly if they have services in that part of the state, it will benefit many of our member institutions, and so we're watching that one closely. And we work very closely with our commercial partners to provide access in the state, and I think I'm proud of the relationship that CENIC has with its commercial partners, many of whom are here today and who have sponsored this conference. And it's a very rich and relationship that has quite a bit of mutual reciprocity. So and will continue to be a focus. Scientific partnerships, we ran a whole series of 100 gig workshops around the state regionally to looking more pragmatically at who needs to connect and when to do what. And these culminated in a workshop right here a week ago that we held with in conjunction with the On Vector workshop that Larry mentioned this morning. And it was focused on a sort of 100 gig, and we called it 100 gig and beyond in California. And it was a great day spent here with a number of scientists, with people from medicine and from media arts, talking about how they plan to make use of the network. We had some interesting societal applications, in particular smart manufacturing, with some leadership on the R&D side coming from California institutions in partnership with some of the many manufacturing companies here in California. And networks are going to be an important part of that endeavor. We also spent a lot of time working with partner institutions to support and help develop a number of grant proposals that go in from those institutions. And we'll continue to do that, particularly as there'll be a subsequent round soon of the NSF CCNIE proposals, and California did really quite well in the last round. International is an important focus of CENIC, in particular through Pacific Wave, but as you'll see at this conference, we have a number of our colleagues here from Mexico, and we have a partnership with Florida International University and AmLight, a project called AmLight West, which is to provide that 10 gig capacity between Los Angeles and Baja. We also work with the University of Hawaii on the Translite Pacific Wave, which will eventually land a 40 gig transoceanic circuit in California and another one up in Washington, with the hopes that someday will be 100 gig capacity and will connect to things like the square kilometer array, part of which will be in Australia. So some exciting things like that. Lastly, one of the areas of focus we've had in the last year is to broaden the base of users of the CalRen network, and there are sort of three major expressions of that. One that has a lot of momentum now, and that is connecting California's 1,100 public libraries to the CalRen backbone. There are 186 library districts that would potentially serve as aggregators, much as the same way that county offices of education serve as aggregators for K-12. There's a Senate bill introduced by Senator Carol Liu, Senate Bill number 331, that sort of lays this out for the legislature. There will be some funding that will need to be available to do that through the California Library Services Act. But I'm hoping next year at this meeting we'll have good representation from California's public libraries. Public libraries are natural partners for us because of their relationships, in particular with many of the community colleges and K-12s. And also the important role that they play in a host of arenas in California public life. We have 3 pilot projects to try and demonstrate what happens when libraries have unfettered access to broadband. What does it mean for the sorts of services they provide to their patrons, to the way they organize themselves administratively, to the sorts of partnerships that they can have. The 3 partners are the Peninsula Libraries. It's 32 libraries from sort of South San Francisco to almost Palo Alto. The libraries in the Central Valley, who have been part of the BTOP program, who now have a 1 gig circuit to each of the libraries, and the San Francisco Public Library System. They'll all be participating with us for the next year in this pilot effort. We work with healthcare, and we do that in some ways indirectly. Beyond the academic medical centers that connect to us, we work with the California Telehealth Network, and CTN connects to the CalREN backbone. And we work with NLR, and in particular, the Cancer Knowledge Action Network of Patrick Soon-Shiong to help engineer an increasing number of connections to healthcare sites in California, so that California can sort of be the first instantiation of his vision of genomic medicine that's broadly accessible to citizens in California. And we've had ongoing conversations with public safety organizations, some of whom were involved in the national rollout of FirstNet, which is a first responders network for fire, ambulance, and police. And there are a couple of leaders in that effort in California who are looking to, it will ultimately be a 4G LTE network, but they're looking to CalREN to provide some of the necessary backhaul for that public safety network. And we're seeing, where that goes and how that partnership works. It's a project that has a much slower evolution. I would say that underscoring all of these activities are really a strategy of partnerships. We partner with our national networks with NLR, Internet2, and ESNet, all three of whom are attending this meeting. We have regional partnerships of the kind that you heard about recently, and we have, as I said earlier, very strong commercial partnerships. So, with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions for any of the panelists, and I think there's somebody around here's got a microphone. So yes, okay, Chris, questions.
Hi, I'm Celeste Anderson at USC, and I also work with CENIC on Pacific Waves. So I have a question for the two of you for the Western Regional and for the Front Range Gigapop. Have you considered, or any of your participants considered, getting a private VLAN into Pacific Wave and using those shared resources that we have to facilitate your international connections?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I asked when I came to CENIC was beyond the obvious users that we all know about who have international partnerships, who else is using this infrastructure? And some are presumably using it sort of not knowing that they're using it, but we'd like to know more about who is using it and who else might use the infrastructure. And so John Sylvester, who many of you know, professor at USC, is joining us for a day a week or so, and going to be making the rounds of a number of the institutions and mostly research institutions in the state to try and figure out to find an answer to that question, to see if there are researchers and research groups who might be better enabled by using this infrastructure, to find out whether there are relationships in the Asia-Pacific region that we should be developing more than we've developed, and so on. And I think that's the hard part of this, to be quite honest, having done this both up north at the University of Washington and in the south at Duke, trying to figure out who needs the resource, making sure that they know about it, and making sure that the focus of the resource is consistent with the set of research interests that are there. So. Other questions?
Since I have the mic, I'll ask a question, maybe for Marla. So with this year's supercomputing being held in Denver, what challenges do you expect from that front range Gigapop may have to deal with, and what type of services do you think are going to be required to support those needs?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Our challenge so far actually has been to sort of stay out of supercomputing. The way the front range Gigapop is structured, we don't have the infrastructure to really help them the way some regionals do. We actually don't have fiber optics into the convention center, and so where they really need to get to, and the I2 people are where we've had this conversation with them, is to I2 and ESNet and N-Wave, and we actually aren't all co-located in a number of regional areas. We're all in the same hut, same suite, same whatever. In this case, we aren't. So we're actually trying to encourage them, because we don't have fiber in place to really help them, to work more closely with the national networks where they actually need to get in place. It's actually interesting to me how poor the network connectivity in the convention center in Denver is, and that they haven't faced this before. And so it's not a done deal that there's fiber in place right now to just light it up. So it's going to be a fair amount of work. On a different note, UCAR is heavily involved in supercomputing from a supercomputing point of view. And there is a front range computing consortium that's very interested in doing high-speed, performance applications. And so we are working with them because that will have to be facilitated through Bison and through our fiber optics with them. And so that piece we're much more involved in, really with our membership, trying to do demonstrations. But right now we're trying to actually kind of keep an arm's length away from the actual CENIC. Having said that, we have people that do participate in CENIC, and we will continue to participate, but just not in a more direct lead role. So the really depressing thing is they're going to keep coming back to Denver. So.
Any other questions? Yes.
Question was, can you speak to SB 331?
Sure. The bill basically calls for a California-wide library intranet, and it's a part of the overall. I can't remember what the specific name of the Education Act is, but it just adds some language there. We're currently working on the budget-related documents that would also go forward to the appropriate committees. There's real enthusiasm, at least among some of the legislators, for doing this. The California Library Services Act had at one point about $20 million in it, and then during the dire times that we seem to be emerging from, more or less, got zeroed out. And that was highly problematic because there were some matching funds necessary to access federal funds from the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which provide sort of block grants to states. That money was put back in, roughly $4 million. And so the goal is to increase it enough to allow the libraries to collectively to become part of CENIC, access the CalREN backbone, but also provide some additional funding to libraries who need a jump start. So that's kind of where we're headed.
I'm glad to hear about some of your successes in New Mexico. One of my questions for you would be sort of moving forward in it being not as densely populated as some of the other areas, and there being places that you're trying to serve that don't have electricity and water. How are you addressing, or what's your vision on how you can address the last mile problems and getting the backhaul and the local loops for some of these underserved populations?
Well, let me use the Zuni Pueblo as the example, the business case. Zuni Pueblo is about 20 miles southeast of Gallup. It's a Union Branch campus. It had 2 bonded T1s up until about 6 months ago. So in cooperation with Navajo Tech, and by the way, Navajo Tech College, sitting in Crown Point, has the highest retention of Native American students. This is one of the best technical projects, particularly with NASA, that we've seen. They're a shining star in New Mexico. They've been building a microwave network on the Navajo Nation because of the sovereign rights issue and the right-of-way issues in New Mexico. To give you an example, in order to get 1 mile of right-of-way in the Navajo Nation, the fee is over $1 million per mile. So what they've been doing is putting up microwave networks. So we established a collaboration with them to create a secondary backhaul loop for Navajo Tech. They connect to us directly today to go to the Zuni campus. So we worked with them and the engineering firm that developed their microwave networks, extended it into Zuni from Gallup, created a Sure DMARC on, you won't care about Mount Gibson, and we've actually established a collaboration with Navajo Tech to continue to build out microwave net where necessary. So as of about 2 months ago, they have 155 meg, which is scheduled to go to 900 meg, to Zuni campus, where 6 months ago it was 3 meg. And the discussion we're having with the Tribal Council in Zuni is to then talk about community wireless. They've asked us to come into the community now and talk about LTE, and also to specifically connect the diabetes clinic in the community. So we're using this as a vehicle to have conversations throughout the state about connecting our medical facilities, particularly in those locations where there's very few options. So the underlying strategy for us is that when the local telcos find out the university is engaged in a build or any type of topic, almost accidentally, new cumulative services start up in that community. So we're finding that driving competition into these local communities is helping immensely, providing technical options as well as price drops. And that we think that's a very useful thing for university to do.
Sherilyn, any parting wisdom for us?
What's off the stage?
Okay. Our timekeeper has said that we're moving from regional to international. So thank you all for participating.